feeling sleepy? I'm your host, Mr. Creepy. Don't fall into the wishing well. Listen to my stories from hell. Ghosts in the afterlife. The werewolf who chomped his wife. A headless dentist on a ATV. The chicken corpse haunting KFC. Ever seen a vampire on a plane? A zombie slurping brains? While you're in your bedroom smoking Indo, didn't you notice the ghoul at your window? Sit back and relax your bones. Get onto your laptops or your phones. The YouTube address FYI is Mr. Creepy's time to die.
Bad evening. I'm Mrs. Creepy, your host. Tonight's story is about a family who moved into a haunted house, and they learn that people, although they think they're dead, are always alive. My family had just recently moved into a house near the city due to my father's new job. It was a pretty nice-sized house, but really old, like a lot of the other houses in the area. While my family wasn't exactly poor, we weren't exactly rich either, so being able to live in a house that wasn't falling apart, as well as having more than a few rooms, felt like heaven at first. But that feeling wouldn't last very long. Since it was a tradition, my family had the house blessed to rid the place of any evil spirits. But this was more like a formality than a belief that the place actually needed it. Even though we were religious, believing that ghosts actually exist to haunt our place wasn't really something we took seriously. But for some reason, something about the house seemed off. Right from the start, most of my family had a weird feeling about the place. It just always felt cold and dark inside, even when the weather was hot. We would even decorate the place with bright colors to change the mood, but it wouldn't really have any effect. It didn't help that the outside at night was really creepy looking. Because the house was in an old neighborhood, surrounded by trees and vegetation, it would get especially dark on cloudy nights. And because we were in a less busy area, it was easy to let your imagination run wild when you would hear sounds coming from the woods nearby at nighttime. But since we didn't want to overreact and ruin what was supposed to be a happy time for our family, we dismissed any feelings of uneasiness about the place. We also figured it was normal to take some time to get used to moving to a new area. Since my dad would be gone most of the day due to commuting to work as well as working a full-time job, it was mostly my mom, grandma, siblings, and I who would be home. Even though it started with a feeling that something was weird with the house, it started to escalate slowly as the weeks would go by. We started to sometimes feel like somebody else was in the room, even when it was clear that there was nobody else other than the family in the house. Some of us would see a shadow in the corner of our eyes, only to find out nobody was there. On more than one occasion, my younger sister would come crying to my mom because supposedly the woman who crawls won't stop scaring her. When we asked why the woman crawled, she said it was because she had no legs. Of course, we wouldn't find any woman and had no idea what she was seeing. my grandmother, whose room was located near the back of the kitchen, started feeling so uneasy sleeping in there that she eventually started sleeping in a room with my younger siblings, which was okay with them since they were getting freaked out by a lot of things that were going on with the house as well. My grandma actually told us that other than getting the sense that somebody else was in her room with her, she would have dreams so scary she would wake up almost screaming because she felt like the dream was continuing. She would tell us that some of the more terrifying dreams involved seeing the image of a dead body inside a closet. And every time my grandma would hear herself snoring in her dream, the dead body would take the opportunity to slowly slide the closet door open and inch its way out towards her. My mother herself would recount an incident where she would see my younger siblings running around and laughing past their bedroom, but when heading to their room to scold them, they would be fast asleep. As for one of my own personal experiences, while studying late at night and going to get a drink of water in the kitchen, I thought I had seen an old man accidentally wandering in our backyard. But his eyes looked completely dark, as if it was just a pair of black marbles. Immediately after seeing him, I started to flick the lights off and on to try to get his attention to leave. But after a few flickers of the light, he was gone. Considering how quick I was flickering the lights, there was no possible way he could have left that fast. But because I was so creeped out, I didn't stick around to find out what happened. I just quickly jumped into bed to cower with one of our cats. And speaking of our pets, our cats all started to act strangely as soon as we moved in. They went from loving and active pets to cats that would spend most of their time hiding around the house. But even with all the scary and weird things we were already experiencing, it wasn't until a couple months into moving to the new house that we experienced the most frightening night of our lives. Like most nights, my father was at work. We suddenly started to hear someone crying. At first, we thought it was one of the younger kids, but we would quickly realize that everyone was at the table. And not only that, the crying sounded like an adult. The crying, in fact, sounded like it was coming from the room where my grandma used to sleep. Right away, due to being freaked out, my younger siblings started crying, wanting to find out what was making the noise. My mother urged me and my grandma to investigate with her. Of course, that only made my younger siblings cry even more, but we had no other choice. We couldn't just ignore it. With a cross in her hand, my mother led the way as my grandma and I followed right behind her. And despite the crying of my younger siblings, we could still hear the crying coming from the room. At that point, we thought that some homeless woman might have sneaked into the house. But just as soon as we opened the door, the crying suddenly stopped. The room and closet was completely clear of any trespassers as well. Right after that, the whole family stayed in my parents' bedroom until my father came home. Of course, after explaining everything to him, my father wasn't exactly happy that we were all, in his words, acting like a bunch of lunatics. Even though he admitted he had experienced a few weird things as well, he dismissed it as nothing more than the stress of having a new job. And despite being religious, he wasn't exactly a big believer in ghosts. So our claims of the house being haunted sounded absolutely ridiculous to him. But after hours of arguing and the sight of the younger kids crying, he eventually agreed to have the house exorcised as long as we didn't let the neighbors or anyone know about it. Waiting a couple of days to get an exorcist to come to the house was pretty difficult, but we were just glad to finally do something about the problem. And in fact, the exorcism seemed to work. While there were still feelings of uneasiness in the house, none of us ever experienced anything downright scary again. Even my younger siblings stopped complaining of any eerie experiences. My grandma never did sleep in the back room again, though, but it didn't matter. Unfortunately, she would pass away in her sleep several months later. A few years later, we would move out of the house after my dad was relocated again for his job. Fortunately, we didn't experience anything strange at the new house. However, the person who had moved into the old house did somehow manage to contact us. Since he worked for the same company my dad did, they had known each other through acquaintances. At first, he asked if our family had experienced anything weird at all at the house. Of course, we denied it to avoid any awkwardness, but that's when he proceeded to tell us that the reason he was asking was because an old lady would sometimes appear in his dreams, and each and every time she did, she would mention the names of our family members and how the exorcism didn't work. The evil spirits are still there, but now she's trapped with them, and they torture her and torment her all the time.
Mr. Creepy here. Friends, we don't care what you thought of tonight's horror story. If you don't stab the like button and slash the subscribe bell, this will happen to you.